you know how deep dives work. We got tabs on tabs up here of all kinds of stuff. We've got Star Citizen Lives, we've got Tony Z with Quantum, we've got dynamic events of all kinds, and we're going to go through the history of how these events have come to be up until now with his smiling face. No, with Blockade Runner, which is being kind of purported as a different kind of event, and also the Overdrive Initiative, which we've just experienced. So, starting from all the way in the beginning, 2014, 10 freaking years ago, almost to the date, this is April 14th, 2014, we will be looking at how dynamic events have come along and what they're supposed to be. We're going to start off here with Chris, and the first mention I can find of dynamic events back during letter 10 from the chairman, which was like, I don't know, the best engine for scope creep you could ever create. Let's listen to what Chris had to say.
Did that, my father did this, and I've done this, and that'll be really
This is not part of the answer we were interested in.
Next question comes from Kinzar, who asks, will there be large-scale dynamic events in the game, such as a full-scale war between the UE and the Vandal or Jean? It would be really cool to have such massively galaxy-spanning events. So we are definitely going to do large-scale dynamic events in the game. Some of them will involve military conflict or some smaller sort of, that could be perhaps a natural disaster on a planet or a system, and people have to bring aid in. And so we're planning to have a lot of these sort of player-driven events that the players can sort of be affected and participate in. So that's definitely part of the plan. Next question comes from...
That's really how answers used to go, by the way, for this kind of show. Like, it was pretty blue sky kind of answers. But that was the first time I had found any talk of dynamic events or what they wanted them to be. Then we jump forward a few years. 7 years, actually. It took a while to get around to this. 7 years to 2021, as we are seeing the first dynamic events start to be introduced to the game. It's called Xenothreat. It's what the Overdrive Initiative was based on. And we have a long talk here between Jared and Tony Zurovic, who did a lot of the work behind getting a lot of the dynamic event and economic and systemic tools kind of stuff going in Star Citizen that is driving a lot of the content we experience now, but we also kind of expected more since then. This is going to be a long talk. We're going to go through probably the first 30 minutes of it or so and stop and talk about a few things here and there.
Now, dynamic events is a phrase that our community has heard several times, whispers here and there over the last year, almost 2 years, going back to 2019, back when we referred to it as timed events in some of the monthly reports stuff. Let's just start things off with a primer here. What is a dynamic event?
So you have to give a little bit of explanation first. Like, the long-term objective for Star Citizen has always been a dynamic, evolving universe. Most of our existing content to date, though, has been inherently static. So missions are offered at a given price at a particular location because a designer dictated it, not because something within the...
Man, I said this was going to be a lighthearted deep dive, folks. I said this is going to be an easy one. But I'm starting to realize this is going to get... we're going to get a little salty during this because he's saying things that are still true. And this was around the time... This is what, January of 2021. This was like, oh my God. Yeah, I don't remember what their outlook was on 4.0 at this point. But if it's January, then the outlook was probably sometime this year. And I don't think we knew about persistent. I don't think we knew about the entity graph at this point. Let me double check that. That was... Gotta do a little research here. Letter from the chairman. 2021? Did we have one in 2021? No, only in 22. Yeah. I think this is where we were told about PES, right? Likely not be able to blah, 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 blah. We pivoted to using graph database at the start of 2021, taking a different approach. Yeah, so we didn't even know about the fact that iCache stopped working or wasn't working at this point. So everything that we're about to hear is going to be from the perspective that things are going smoothly and server meshing is not far away. Oh boy. All right, let's get into it.
Economic pipeline actually required that work be done. So if you're refueling, reloading, or repairing a ship, that doesn't actually increase the demand and thus the price for the associated commodities and components at refineries or shops. Similarly, the likelihood of running into a pirate on a given route doesn't waver regardless of whether a lot of unarmed cargo transports carrying valuable materials start traveling that path. So Quantum, which is the simulation that I showed off at the last CitizenCon, that's the primary method by which we're going to address this. And it simulates the effect of a vast amount of AI, and it then feeds those results, to the game, and then factors.
By the way, I'm always going to take an opportunity to point out the fact that the simulation's called Quantum and not Quanta, as per the person who made it. Just saying.
Back into the simulation. So you wind up with this very logical ebb and flow that you'd expect, and that creates a lot of temporary opportunities for people to exploit, and in general, it just makes the game feel far more interesting to play. So dynamic events are different. You can think of them you can think of them a bit as designer-driven short stories that can be layered on top of Quantum's systemic background, and they can be triggered manually or automatically when certain conditions are met. So if the system decides that war is broken out in an area, or we just decide that we want to liven things up a little, then designers and writers can inject a lot of precisely curated content into the game, and the impact of those modifications will then be blended into the simulation.
That's really you said there's two ways to trigger them. Either we can set up situations, criterias in which the players meet them, and the system automatically goes, oh yeah, trigger this particular event.
That's what we want, right? You want to be able to do enough stuff. You want to, I don't know, kill enough animals in one area that anti-poachers are hired as mercenaries to come get you. We have some of these. The Ghost Hollow mission is a dynamic event. What is it? The Korea. You take over the security post Korea. That spawns a dynamic event. So they're doing these, but they're not even calling them dynamic events anymore. And I guess I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I think that's why they're starting to call these previously called dynamic events as global events, because they're not dynamic.
Or we can trigger them manually. Just describe to me the difference there. Why would we use one over the other for a particular situation?
Well, it's actually similar to a lot of what we've done with the normal development cycle, which is, on the one hand, we're putting out a live product, and so we have to build, we have to have something that the community can play right now. But at the same time, we're planning for the future. And so if you think about shops as an example, if all that a shop was going to do was basically offer a certain number of items for sale or a particular price, then the effort that we've expended to get us to here, was dramatically over-engineered. And it's been that way for the last 2.5 years, and it's only now that you're starting to bring in Quantum and have Quantum start to dictate some of this information, these services, which then cache this information.
It's just not fun to hear that 3 years later that we're bringing in Quantum and we're still like, where's Quantum?
Responsible for basically receiving callbacks from the individual shops and then feeding, on occasion, some of those transactional events back to the mission instances that are running on some of these servers, that you start to see why we made some of the choices we did back then. And in other words, it's kind of like before you can get around to building the skyscraper, you have to lay the foundation. And so we've said this so many times in the past, and we're starting to get to the point now to where we're starting to exploit, some of these underlying pieces. I mean, Quantum's another perfect example in that regard, in that we have these so-called probability volumes that dictate what sort of stuff you can encounter in a given, area of space. And then we have shops, and we have, service beacons, and we have all of these, different systems. But right now designers go in, even missions, for what amount of money and what level of risk you're going to incur when you actually accept them. That's all fixed right now. The designers are able to set up these data structures, but what we haven't previously been able to do is provide the real-time dynamic inputs that would allow us to make these things ebb and flow. In other words, if there's currently a lot of pirates in an area, then having something delivered to that area should logically cost more. There's a greater risk, to you and your ship, and and all that type of stuff. But designers haven't had the tools to be able to automatically feed that type of real-time information into these mission archetypes that they're setting up. And we're just now getting across a wide range of areas into doing some of that. And so there is an update that I'll be giving within roughly the next few months that will basically explain what we've been working on insofar as not just quantum, but also some related back-end technologies to help generate this this algorithmic, this systemically derived information, and then feed it into the game. And in a few cases, we've actually we'll actually be able to demonstrate real actual working examples as opposed to just being theory. I always hate to do too many repeated theory talks, and so one of the things we debated doing this presentation a little bit earlier, but it still would have been in the vein of, it's coming. And so I intentionally wanted to hold it back a few extra months so that we could demonstrate some of this stuff live and actually show some of these pieces of tech and functionality coming to fruition.
Yeah. I do want to add on top of that, just for the community, this update that Tony is talking about that will come. We're not going to say when. Let's be real. We don't have a great history of saying, "Hey, we're going to have this video out then." But
it's right
we're
here.
Working on it.
We'll look at it in a second.
And from what I've already seen, it's pretty awesome. Tyler's in my chat right now, like, "Tell people it's awesome." It is awesome.
It's kind of like a
What's up, Grenar?
Where there are certain things you want to demonstrate, and there's always a little bit of uncertainty with respect to development schedules. And so it's difficult to say precisely, but we are already deep into testing multiple facets of what we're aiming to deliver. So it's coming.
See, but are you?
In our long history of saying, "Hey, we're going to have a special video out at this point talking about this thing," our track record's not so good here. So just hang tight. All right. So right now on the PTU, there's a dynamic event, our first dynamic event called Xenothreat that's currently being tested now. Without spoiling the event, we obviously don't want to break it down and be like, "Hey, phase one is this." We don't want to go into that much detail on it. But tell us what Xenothreat is, what we're hoping to accomplish.
There were two primary things on our minds when
Jesus.
thinking about this event, and we started discussing this internally probably almost a year ago. Back in first quarter 2020, what we wanted to achieve, and the other thing that we wanted, besides it being fun, was that it wouldn't cause us to deviate too much from the natural trajectory of the development effort. In other words, it couldn't be too disruptive. We wanted to take the things that logically followed in terms of the development effort and look for ways that we could exploit and reveal these to players and basically improve the overall gameplay experience. And in certain cases, of course, a little bit more effort here, pushing something else back to free up some bandwidth so that we could polish something a little sooner than it would otherwise be the case. That always happens. And so one of the primary things that we wanted to do was get all of the mission and backend infrastructure operational. And this is, for example, there's backend tools now, and I'll cover this, in the upcoming presentation, to activate and monitor and deactivate missions. And that's, again, if you look at Xenothreat, the amount of work that's gone into allowing this event to basically be to be activated is far larger than what you're able to see right now. What I mean by that is it exposes an entirely different way for designers to start to set these things up. They're able to, for example, within the, when they're crafting the mission archetype logic, they can now declare these static instanced variables that are managed by the back end. And they also have the concept of phases, which are conditionals that can be associated with these variables that are managed by the back end. And the significance of this is that we can
just say when the new phase starts.
Coordinate mission logic across all the different servers. And that's how Xenothreat fundamentally works, which is we have 4 phases in this mission. There's the introductory phase where we're kind of like, giving, we're hinting that, something's to come. We're doing some foreshadowing. There's the actual, javelin restocking, phase. Then there is, the climactic battle scene. And then there's the conclusion. And all of these, are really, they're representative. And what this event allowed us to do.
Okay, wait. This is what Tony does. I'm pretty sure at the beginning of this talk here, Jared had said we're not going to give away all the phases and how it splits up. And then Tony came in and just said all the phases. I'm pretty sure.
Foreshadowing. There's the actual, javelin restocking, phase. Then there is, the climactic battle scene. And then there's the conclusion. And all of these, are really, they're representative. And what this event allowed us to do, most importantly, was to test and refine and get all this, stuff out and working in the real world. Like, so now you've actually got a dynamic mission service, and you actually have the concept of these global variables, and the mission, and the designers are able to communicate with them through subsumption task archetypes, and we're able to do these conditional evaluations. We're able to basically have the backend synchronize however many servers we have to keep them all in lockstep. And then there's all sorts of fine tuning that goes on to where, well, a particular server, and it's in, say, phase 2, and they're restocking, and they've got the javelin in port, and then and the designers can actually set it up to do things, and they are things like the number of javelins that are successfully restocked in phase 2 can then serve as an input to
He's just
phase
telling
3,
everything. He's telling everything.
Frequency
I think I remember this. I think Jared calls it out.
From the UEE Navy depends upon how successful you were in defending those ships in that earlier phase. And again, it's what matters less is the specifics of what we're doing, right this moment with that, and more what we're allowing the designers to do in the future, how we're basically unblocking them to do lots more cool stuff. Another big focus for this particular event, a major one, was from the beginning we knew that we wanted to put a lot of emphasis, for the first time on the capital ship battles. So there were a litany of changes that we needed to make in order to enable this. And at the very top of the list was how the AI responded to the threat of torpedoes. So originally, and I say this was still true as of about 4 months ago when we finally got to the major push in that regard. Originally, neither turrets nor ships tasked with defending a capital ship paid them any heed. And that meant that it was way too easy to take these capital ships out in the early days. It was literally trivial. It was no fun at all. And so we spent over a month fine-tuning various systems so that countermeasures would be launched and worked as expected. Turrets would prioritize major incoming threats like a torpedo over most other things. Players would be rewarded for coordinating their attacks with one another. Like you tend to be much more successful if 3 players launch torpedoes at the same time. And and we built in into the logic this
Jared's
this sense to where it's not like it's
proper target selection.
Well, what we didn't want to do is make it too robotic, too precise, not because you might not have that 1,000 years in the future, but simply because it's not fun. And so what we wanted to do, if it targets perfectly and if it's able to, perfectly shift its attention, it simply didn't deliver the gameplay feeling that we wanted. And so again, we've spent weeks and weeks tweaking, fine tuning this until we were internally pretty happy with the results. Another good example was the Idris. The Idris was originally pretty suicidal in that it would happily engage the Javelin and get destroyed as long as it managed to get off its railgun. And so its logic wound up evolving to the point where it's now much more opportunistic. It wants to use its railgun, but only when that doesn't put it in too much danger. And then one other thing that we noticed was that the turret targeting couldn't be so Boolean. It couldn't focus 100% of its attention on an attacker that was only slightly more attractive than another player, because again, it looked artificial, and most importantly, it just wasn't very fun for the other players. We were getting internal reports of, you have 8 turrets active on a ship, and you've got 16 players, and that when it was so Boolean, meant that at least half of the players were not having any of that firepower focused on them even for an instant, and so they felt relatively bored in terms of the danger presented to them.
You want to be shot at if you're attacking, if you're jumping in the battle with an Idris and a javelin. You want to be shot at. You want to feel like I'm a threat. Shoot at me.
Yeah, and so there's a lot more fuzziness in grain, and it took time to basically work through all these details. I mean, we sat through every single week reviewing what how it looked when you basically fired individual torpedoes at a ship. How it looked when you fired multiple torpedoes. How it looked if you fired multiple torpedoes with a very small differential in time versus a large differential in time. How the ship responded when it still had countermeasures available. And then another aspect of this was the support ships that basically defend these capital ships. It's the same thing, to where even if you're firing upon them,
for that long.
If the torpedoes launched at the capital ship, they'll see that as a greater threat, break off, potentially at risk to themselves, and prioritize dealing with that torpedo. And so there's a multitude of these things that had to be worked through. And there's, of course, there's more we could do. There's more we will do. It's by no means, perfect, but it's light years. I mean, I hesitate to say it's light years beyond where we were, when this started, because some of this stuff hadn't even realistically gotten off the ground, and now it's actually in some of these select areas, it's actually quite mature.
You mentioned a couple of things I want to follow up on. First off, the process of.
So this is it's a very particular way of answering it, and I've always loved. I've loved the idea that Tony Z has. I think it's hard to follow. God, the only time I've ever clicked out of a CitizenCon panel, it was a combination of both I'm sick of hearing talk, and this is just way too many words coming at the same time, is this one here. No, this one. This was a hard CitizenCon panel to listen to, especially because I think this came towards the end of CitizenCon 2021, which was pretty it's very concept heavy. We got a lot of things that were coming in the fairly distant future, and then we got this just massive freaking hour and a half long panel of these dudes almost entirely just sitting at a table talking theory. Like you can see from the title, it's Systemic Gameplay, Stream of Thought. That's very, very particular. This was, I think, the only one that I ever was just I've never listened to this all the way through. But it's how his answers tend to go, and it's beloved by a lot of people. A lot of people don't like it. I love the ideas. I do think, though, that we haven't seen enough of the stuff that he's talked about come to the game at this point. I mean, it's 2021 here, and they're talking about the idea of testing things in the coming months. And it's been 3 years since then. I will say, I had a lot of hopes for the system, but I still haven't seen much from it. And there's gosh, would I be able to find that? There's while this is still playing, I'm going to look up something on the side here. The next one I wanted to hear answered was this.
There's the systemic triggers, the things that that can trigger all these things by just meeting criteria, and then the manual triggers. Some of the folks in the chat are asking if the manual triggers are akin to the old GM events that you would see in older MMOs, where a design, in this case a designer as opposed to a GM, can come in and just create a one-time event that would occur.
That's exactly it. And some of these will be one time, like the Zenith Threader or a particular Fleet Week or other ones will basically just add to our library of things, that we can activate simply because we want it to liven up the place. The Nine Tails, I don't want to go into, the Nine Tails, I don't want to go into the detail, because, there's some cool stuff that we'll be introducing that players haven't, that they haven't really seen before. So I want to kind of, keep some of it under wraps. But it's very representative of some of the bits of functionality that we're introducing in there will then be exploited in more dramatic fashion in subsequent dynamic events. Like one high level example would simply be the Ninetale stuff is kind of geared towards a certain area, basically being locked down as a result of aggression. And in the future, what we're going to wind up having is if the player community doesn't beat back that particular threat, then it will grow. And all of a sudden, you've got 2 or 3 or 4 different areas locked down. In other words, you, the player community, have to respond and tamp out this fire, or else it will gradually grow. Now, it's possible, of course, depending upon how we set it up and what the current inputs, it's like the NPC population in some cases may eventually respond sufficiently to do it. But you get the overall effect, which is this one event that's geared towards locking down an area. The area to be locked down is an input, and we can feed it 1, we can feed it 3, we can basically add a little bit of back-end logic controls, and then then which ones are locked down can be replicated across all of the servers. So the community as a whole is fighting just like they are in Xenothreat against this common threat.
Gotcha. So
that's kind of like what people find really interesting in Helldivers, right? How you fight something and it all goes towards the same goal across all the servers, which is cool. And I see what you're saying, Fire, that the phases of Xenothreat are dynamically triggered, which is that's great. Not to say that's not good for the game or the missions or anything.
I'm just going to do this for clarity's sake. A lot of the folks have been asking whether Xenothreat specifically is a one-time event, you play it and it's never back, or whether it may come back. I know from internal conversations we're reserving our options there, whether Xenothreat's going to be a one-time thing or it's going to come back. But we have the option, though. That's the important part for this conversation, is that we can do these one-time limited events that occur in Star Citizen's history, and when they're done, they never return ever again. Or we can do ones that are recurring, or we can do ones that build upon each one, where it's like this is a one-time thing, but it leads into another event X number.
And that's Overdrive Initiative.
Months later, leads into another event X number of months later, and that's how we start adding a persistent and long-form storyline to the persistent universe.
Yeah, this one, the Xenothreat is basically
attacking,
harassing the UE, and you're there to basically help, beat back, some of the specific challenges to basically salvage material, to restock the Javelin, defend transport ships, to the same effect, all this type of stuff. In the future, there may very well be ones where you actually have to go into, occupied space, so it's really dangerous to get there, infiltrate bases, retrieve stuff, bring it back. And then what we'd be measuring is well, how much total information or assets or stolen ships that you've retrieved, et cetera, how many have has the community pulled back. And again, I keep referring to like the community, because in general these dynamic events are meant to be things that apply across the entire spectrum of servers and not isolated onto a just one individual instance. If you're talking about just an individual server instance, then you're really talking more of like I was saying earlier, with like the dynamic missions, to where if it's all on one server, then you don't need all this back-end coordination and variable maintenance and phases and all that. You can literally just run it with your normal subsumption mission logic.
Just looking at some of the questions from the live chat here. Some of these.
Sorry, I'm still trying to find this other post that I had for you guys. It was talking about quantum getting applied. Maybe he talks about it here. Let's see if this is it. This is a little bit off topic. This is not about dynamic events. This is about the system that runs those dynamic events. But I just want to confirm something here.
Without spoiling that, can you give us a bit of an update on how things have been progressing? Whether you're happy with where we're at right now?
Yeah, it's come a long way. All the TypeScript logic has been redone in C# for the AI, which basically resulted in somewhere in the range of 3 order of magnitude increase. So we can basically easily simulate several million quanta, and we can do that at multiples of normal speed. And that's important because we need to be able to tweak certain levers let the simulation run for an hour and then see how stuff kind of balanced out and what kind of what kind of limits we hit on certain things. Did prices ever get too out of whack here? Was did the offering price for a particular mission ever get completely ridiculous given these parameters that we'd set up? We're in the final stages now of starting to connect Quantum to some of the back-end services so that they're actually feeding data from the simulation to the services. The services have long been feeding that information then to the actual game servers, and then basically receiving it back. Like one of the most recent examples here is and it's kind of related to the dynamic event shop modifier stuff, which is the potential to add items, add new items to a particular shop. So right now that inventory has always historically been fixed. And so now with the modifier, since we can add something, it's the same thing you'll see in Quantum, which is shops may occasionally change some of their inventory items. And so it turns out that there's a little bit of work we need to do on the game server in order to support that. There's been a lot of focus on basically getting extracting chunks of information from the service beacons that we demonstrated before. We were generating the events, but they weren't actually making their way to the back end. So that information will be filtering up. In other words, where you see calls for assistance, calls for combat assistance for you to come, will in the not too distant future be dictated via that quantum simulation. The price of fuel will be dictated by how much of a load there is in that particular area. And all these things take time because the previous iteration we showed of quantum, as you got all these quanta going around, they didn't have at that time any concept of fuel or efficiency in terms of what ship they were flying and how much fuel it consumed. They basically got transport for free, and so a lot of those kind of things are being wrapped up. We spent relatively recently a good bit of time getting Quantum, the service, to actually ship, to basically be built.
Quantum, not Quanta.
The game. So we're not currently exploiting it, but it's there right alongside a litany of all these other services. So that piece, which was a significant effort, is now in and done. And basically what that means is we've got the basic elements of plumbing to get all this information going back and forth. And what we're focused on right now is actually is realizing some of that stuff.
Star Citizen, we've got the plumbing.
Okay, I found what I was looking for. Took long enough. Here is a video about 317 talking about some of these background systems that we're talking about and the plans they had for them at that time going into
any
Star
news
Citizen.
On the implementation of Quantum, we'll leave it there.
317 Quantum.
Yeah, so I talked to Tony about it today. So they're still planning on Quantum in 317 to dictate the price of 3 commodities: repair, materials, quantum fuel, and hydrogen fuel, and where service beacons occur, and the price, and then 3 probability volume tags: piracy, security, and freighters, at about a dozen locations. So that's the way that the first iteration of Quantum will be put in, and then from there, again, every quarter we'll build on it and adjust it and then go from there.
So, I'm sorry, did I mishear you? You're saying that Quantum will be dictating the prices of those things in 317?
It's that, yes. So, but it'll be dictating the price for 3 commodities, not all the commodities. Just
I don't think this happened.
But I think that's news in and of itself.
But this was a huge announcement at the time. The idea that Quantum was getting implemented and then that it would be iterated on every update after this.
Quantum will be put in, and then from there, again, every quarter we'll build on it and adjust it and then go from there.
And that did not happen. I think the only thing that Quantum currently does is some of the mission beacon spawns, which, I will say are pretty nice. You can get good money from doing those combat missions in the beacon spawns. But as you can see, this is the most replayed part of this episode. This was a hugely important thing for them to admit, and it kind of just didn't happen. So it's part of why you'll see people talk about this system, and this system heavily ties into dynamic events, which is why this is something I'm talking about. We'll see this here now. as I go into that update they said was coming a few months later in this video. That's this update. It goes over a ton of stuff and it's actually pretty interesting. But we're specifically looking at dynamic events today, so we'll look at it here.
Through the probability volume service that is responsible for interdiction.
We've definitely heard about quantum since then, but we haven't quite seen it.
His jump is interrupted, and he transitions from executing virtual AI on the back end to a full-blown subsumption-driven AI executing logic on a server, so that the two of them can battle it out.
Tell us about dynamic events, Tony. My boy.
Change up their tactics a bit and wait to see if Dragon soon returns to Port Olisar, where they could try to sneak up on him on foot. The ultimate objective for Star Citizen has always been a dynamic and evolving universe. Historically, however, our mission content has always been static. We've had no ability to modify it after we pushed a version out the door. Missions have also been confined to a single server, each of which was thus its own little island, cut off and oblivious to whatever was happening elsewhere. Environmental data that applies to all of the servers, what items the shop offers for sale, how many freighters or pirates are in a given region of space, or what missions are available at a landing zone, couldn't be altered by the instance mission logic that executes on individual servers, since we didn't yet have a means of coordinating those efforts. The end result has been a universe that often feels static and fails to offer sufficient variety. Dynamic events are a special type of mission intended to help remedy this problem. They are modular chunks of configurable content that might involve anything from throwing a simple wrench into the wheels of the systemic economy, to a prison break that stresses the law system, to a full-blown invasion of a solar system. Dynamic events are global in nature. They affect the entire array of servers. They do this via extensions to the mission language that allow them to declare what logic runs in parallel on every server and what executes on the back end, while at the same time gaining the ability to query and modify a lot of global data. This allows us to keep the critical elements of these scenarios synchronized across all the servers while retaining the flexibility for every server to have its own unique state. Conceptually, the servers control the battle and the back end manages the war. The Xenothreat mission that we released in the first quarter was a dynamic event. It was triggered manually, although Quantum will eventually gain the ability to automatically activate these scenarios when conditions warrant. If, for example, the amount of piracy in an area gets out of control, Quantum might search through the mission library to find a dynamic event compatible with an elevated amount of piracy, and then customize and instantiate that scenario so that a lot of handcrafted content, unique character dialogue, challenges, rewards, can be...
Sorry, I was muted there. Okay. This is super key to me. I pointed it out before. I'm going to keep pointing it out the whole day because this is a huge change in their vocabulary, in my opinion.
Piracy in an area gets out of control, Quantum might customize and instantiate that scenario.
Where does he just say that? There we go.
It was a dynamic event.
So,
war.
Listen to this.
The Xenothreat mission that we released in the first quarter was a dynamic event. It was triggered manually, although Quantum will eventually gain the ability to automatically activate these scenarios when conditions warrant.
So, he said it's a dynamic event, and it was triggered manually, but eventually Quantum will be able to trigger these automatically. Now, we haven't seen Quantum yet, but if you go to the newest version of Xenothreat, which is going on right now, and you look at how they talk about it, how do they talk about it? I kind of didn't check before I did this to make sure I was right, but we'll see. Oh, yeah, I'm right. Okay. Overdrive Initiative is a series of connected missions. This is very small. Oh no. Okay. Overdrive Initiative is a series of connected missions leading up to the explosive Xenothreat global event. So they've made like a really clear change on dynamic versus global for naming these things. But if you go back here, you see that a global event is specifically something that they talked about. And I think that's just because I feel like they're kind of trying to not mislead people with the name dynamic event. I mean, I know that the phases trigger each other as you go, but calling it a global event just seems more accurate to me. I don't know. I guess maybe a little bit of a tinfoil hat moment.
The Xenothreat mission that we released in the first quarter was a dynamic event. It was triggered manually, although Quantum will eventually gain the ability to automatically activate these scenarios when conditions warrant. If, for example, the amount of piracy in an area gets out of control, Quantum might search through the mission library to find a dynamic event compatible with an elevated amount of piracy, and then customize and instantiate that scenario so that a lot of handcrafted content, unique character dialogue, challenges, rewards, can be blended into the universe simulation. We're aiming for the best of both worlds then, a systemic universe that provides a logically consistent background environment with the ability to overlay content and storylines that writers, designers, and many others have spent a lot of time creating. This is Quasar, a new tool that lets us manage dynamic events in the live game. It's linked to the same star map as Quantum and has access to much of the same information. I'm looking through the library of available events, and as I select each one, you can see the input parameters that can be used to customize that particular scenario. We've got quite a few of these at different stages of development, with Fleet Week, Ninetales, and Infiltrator being the next few in the pipeline. I'm going to walk you through a simple dynamic event called Quasar Demo that will show off a few of the systemic hooks we've linked into the mission system, but first I need to specify the inputs. The first thing that it requires is a location, and I'm going to select Port Olisar by simply clicking on the star map. The next couple of variables require a ship type. I'm going to specify Idris for the Defender input and Cutlass Black for attackers. If Quantum were to programmatically trigger an event like this, it'd fill in variables like these with something that made contextual sense. So, for example, it'd be looking at what sort of ships were in the area where the event would be activated to determine what it could consider. The next variable relates to difficulty, which in this particular case has simply been configured to dictate the speed at which enemies will appear. The last input, enemies remaining, indicates how many enemies must be destroyed in aggregate across all of the servers in order for the war phase to be completed and the victory phase to be activated. I'm going to set this to 10. With everything configured, I can now activate the event. Quasar communicates this request to the dynamic mission service, which then initializes the backend logic, allocates the global variables, sets up the phase conditionals, informs all of the servers to start any instance logic the event might contain, and quite a bit more. I'm now going to flip over to Quasar's active tab so that we can check the event's real-time data.
So this is a system that, like, while he's demoing it here, still doesn't feel like it works, right? These things don't happen automatically. Like I said, the only things that I notice happening automatically are like the Korea mission, I think, do data heists trigger something like this? Maybe, I don't know. But Korea and Ghost Hollow are the ones that I notice are things a player can do that triggers the game to then launch a mission for somebody else. I would love to see more of this, but I feel like this is something that the servers can't even handle yet. And we'll get to the last things they've said about Quantum, which do have to do a little bit with servers and all that kind of stuff. But an interesting system, and he talks about it a lot here. I think he comes back to it here at the end, and it does show how this can work across servers. Let's check that part out before we move on.
Now let's take a look at how each server can host part of a larger event while the things that really matter can remain synchronized. I'm going to enable the war phase by calling the start war function. That's going to create some staged battles involving the ship types we selected earlier around Port Olisar, the area that we previously selected. I brought up a couple of different client windows, each of which represents a different server. As each Cutlass is destroyed on either server, the shared variable called enemies remaining is decremented. Once that variable reaches 0, the war phase will automatically terminate and the victory phase will be activated. That's it. The counter just hit 0 and you can see the change in the active phases over in Quasar. That last phase, victory, kicked off some
you're confusing me in chat, Mastodon. You're saying that the Overdrive Initiative is called a global event because it's for a sale, rather than because it's just a global event? My point is that... Hold on. Okay, this is rather dumb. What's it called? I don't have that. Actually have to do that. Let's go back to last year real quick. What is this? Missions to make.
In addition
Blockade
to the
Runner.
standard missions that populate the verse, the mission feature team is always examining and reevaluating the global events that run
Global events. Overdrive, this Blockade Runner has nothing to do with the sale, right?
throughout the year. Do they perform the way we intend they should? Not just in frame rate, but also in engagement, enjoyment, enchantment, entertainment. And if they're not, perhaps they need enhanced lockdown. A bit of both.
Blockade Runner actually replaces Ninetales Lockdown. We analyzed Ninetales Lockdown and we looked at participation in that global event. And we also looked at what players did in it. So
okay, so they've called global event here. He just said global event with Ninetales Lockdown, and Jared just referred to global event with Blockade Runner. Global event has nothing to do with whether there's a sale or not. That's silly. I think it's because they realize that calling it a dynamic event is not as reliable. They called Blockade Runner a dynamic event in the roadmap, though. See now. That's CIG being CIG, huh? No, I think that it is... I think they're trying to switch the name a little bit from dynamic event to global event in order to show the difference between an event that's manually triggered and an event that is dynamically triggered. I don't think they're purposely avoiding saying dynamic event. I think they're trying to apply definitions to dynamic event and global event. I think it would be weird for them to just change the name because there's a sale. They make sales. They do sales for every single event that ever happens. Anyways, let's get back to what he's saying here and see how it works across different shards.
Through the dangerous areas. Once the risk abates, once players in Quanta have dispatched enough of the pirates so that travel within this area returns to normal, you'll be able to much more easily deliver medical supplies to Port Olisar, but of course that increase in supply will quickly shrink the price differential. Now let's take a look at how each server can host part of a larger event while the things that really matter can remain synchronized. I'm going to enable the war phase by calling the start war function. That's going to create some staged battles involving the ship types we selected earlier around Port Olisar, the area that we previously selected. I brought up a couple of different client windows, each of which represents a different server. As each cutlass is destroyed on either server, the shared variable called enemies remaining is decremented. Once that variable reaches 0, the war phase will automatically terminate and the victory phase will be activated.
No, this is an older video. This is showing off the beginning of dynamic events.
That's it. The counter just hit 0 and you can see the change in the active phases over in Quasar. That last phase, Victory, kicked off some fireworks around Port Olisar, and just like any other phase change, that will automatically be synchronized across all of the servers. Just to make sure that things
confusing part is like we're now switching over from terminology of servers to shards. So when he says servers, he means shards from our perspective, which then indicates that this is supposed to be happening at the same time on all shards.
Normal. I'm going to check Port Olisar's admin.
So things like Invictus Week, right? Like events that are supposed to take place on... Oh, okay. Duh. Events that are supposed to take part across the whole globe at the same time. That's what a global event is. I just had to take the road trip to find it out.
Office and see what's happening with the inventory and prices. They're no longer looking to purchase medical supplies, and with the pirate threat eliminated, players in Quanta can once again quickly and safely reach Port Olisar. As a result, the cost of food has started to fall off a cliff and will soon return to something close to its pre-crisis levels. I've covered a lot of ground today. Quantum has matured considerably since you last saw it. The performance issues have been resolved, it's been made compatible with our back-end infrastructure, and it's now communicating with numerous gameplay services. Lots of new analytical tools and functionality have been added, and increased fidelity in areas like quantum.
I'm going to be really interested in seeing how Blockade Runner runs. If they're calling it a dynamic event, I want to see if it ever runs on shards at different times or not. Okay, so from there, this was the introduction to this whole system. From there, where they were finally ready to launch their first dynamic event into the game, that was, Xenothreat. Star Citizen 3.12, 3 years ago. For those who haven't gotten to try Xenothreat, they're doing Overdrive Initiative right now, and I'm sure whatever they come up with as the final part of Xenothreat for this Overdrive Initiative is going to be much better than what we're about to watch, but this was the first iteration of it. Should be an interesting watch.
Dynamic events are things that draw people into the game. They could be large, they could be small. It's also useful for testing core systems like the law system, spawn timers, the cargo system, ship-to-ship communication, your HUD UI. The possibilities are pretty much endless.
The remaster of the Xenothreat event has so many improvements based on the feedback from the last event.
There was a kind of reaction to the way the phases, as we call them, the resupply phase and then the showdown phase,
which was previously broken into two pieces.
You were ramping up to a big fight, and then it just repeated the resupply, and then you moved to showdown, and it was just a big fight, and it was a big fight for days on end.
What you'll get now is that basically you are resupplying the javelin that will then take you to the battle. And should you do a really bad job of keeping its health up, what you'll end up with is a smoking javelin on the other side. So that's the major, I'd say the headline change to the event itself. But we've made so many other fixes.
We have made changes to the hostility system.
The AI would remember that you'd done something bad to them, and even if they were busy, say the javelin was busy fighting Xenothreat, it could be like 15 minutes, half an hour later, that it remembers, that you're someone who shot it and starts attacking you, and you have no idea why. Now we've put this decay in, what it means is if you do go above a friendly fire threshold, you will turn hostile, but that the length of time you'll remain hostile will depend on how many times did you sustain fire on them. We've also massively reworked the way friendly fire works, because previously there was just one
I think
set of...
the best thing I'm hoping to see with this next version of Xenothreat, especially if it happens after 3.23 comes out, is people being able to naturally take sides based on reputation. It's like I think that's something that people were hoping for from this very first time seeing it. It's like, I want to go and fight for the bad people, which, people still found a way to. It's not like they stopped just because the game wasn't ready for it.
Friendly fire for everything in the game. Now it's split into AI, which we're much more lenient with, and players, which we obviously have to be a lot less lenient with. One of the other ways we'll be improving Xenothreat is with new dialogue.
We had players who weren't quite sure of what they had to do from moment to moment.
The game is so deep, but maybe people aren't understanding that, because it's the first time we've done it. You can scan these wrecks and you can see that there are still cargo aboard and that there are enemies aboard before you even go on. Because that was one of the big complaints, they'd get to a wreck and find it empty. So there's now dialogue lines reminding you can.
The significance of the gameplay that you're seeing on the screen right now, it looks basic because we do this all the time, but this was not a reality before this patch. The tractor beam wasn't a thing. This was the first real implementation where we got to use the tractor beam well. I think it was this patch or the one before it was introduced, and it felt so much better. It was like how recently when we got these cargo containers where you could put items in it, you just felt like it was a natural step. You were just supposed to be able to have boxes that you could put stuff in, because that's a normal function in a f***ing game. But this was great to feel when Xenothreat was happening, and I loved getting out of my ship, going onto a derelict ship, and getting crucial supplies for the war effort. It was cool. It was solid. It was nice. I hope we get more dynamic events that feel that way. That was I don't know, that felt really substantial to me.
You can see that
there are
still cargo aboard and that there are enemies aboard before you even go on. Because that was one of the big complaints, they'd get to a wreck and find it empty. So there's now dialogue lines reminding you can scan these things before you're even anywhere near them. One of the main criticisms we got was that there were no rewards.
We're now going to be giving rewards based on reputation, because we've added reputation to Xenothreat.
With the addition of reputation, we're able to start using that to build reputation with the CDF, the Civilian Defense Force. And the more missions you do, or the better you do within missions with these events, the higher you'll go up through the standings with them. And depending on what standing you're at, when the event ends, you'll get various different rewards.
So we're really looking forward to having the event work alongside all of the new systems we have coming online, plus all of the things we've added to the event itself. So we have, alongside, we're going to have the capacitors, we've got new scanning and pinging.
It's not just an event, it's not just a weak event that we then throw away or anything like that. We have continued to work not to improve Xenothreat, but to improve the next fleet battle.
So our next...
Okay. So from there, is this the same video? It is. Okay, so from there we got to learn about Ninetales Lockdown. That's what's going to end up becoming Blockade Runner, which it sounds like it's going to be a lot better, but this all started in 2021. Like, this is not old stuff. Star Citizen 4 years ago is a lot different from what it is right now in a lot of different ways. It's not, you know, it's not to say that this is a complete game, but every time I do these kinds of look backs, I'm like, man, I didn't realize that was so recent. Recent, relatively speaking, too. Most games I don't even follow for 4 years. Here's the Ninetales Lockdown, by the way. This is, you might not have heard of this one because it didn't do very well.
So our next dynamic event is going to be Ninetales Lockdown. In Ninetales Lockdown, the Ninetales criminal gang is going to lock down a space station under the control of Crusader security, and both sides will then recruit players to help them to either end or continue the lockdown. That's actually going to allow us to do some really interesting stuff with combining PvP and PvE content and seeing how you all kind of interact with each other and honestly fight against each other in a more controlled ring. Ninetales basically breaks down into 4 phases. In the first phase, which we call the prologue, we're basically trying to get players online and let them know that something is about to happen. Eventually, after phase 1 has been running for long enough, it kicks into phase 2. In phase 2, Crusader is aware that something is causing a quantum blockade around a station, and is making it so that it is quite dangerous and time-consuming to get to and from that station. They recruit players to protect ships that they will send out to scan for whatever is causing that quantum blockade. However, on the other side of things, Ninetales is going to be recruiting to have players go and destroy those ships, and seeing those two sides kind of collide with each other is where we're hoping to get a lot of the interesting gameplay in that stage. We've seen some really interesting stuff in Phase 2, just from player tactics and such, that have been very enjoyable to watch. For some of our QA testing, actually, they employed at one point, because the scanning ships are somewhat fragile, a hammerhead is almost a shield wall, physically blocking missiles and fire against those scanning ships and deploying chaff and such in order to reroute the missiles, which made for some very interesting tactical discussions right before they would test for that day. We're hoping that players will begin to develop similar strategies in order to counter each other in this more sandbox style of PvP. As for phases 3 and 4, I'd love to give you more detail, but Jared won't let me. We want to leave some things for you guys to discover, and there are little pieces of content scattered throughout the event that aren't going to be explicitly handed to you or told to you in a mission description that I'm really excited to see you guys discover as you're playing through this over and over. It is a smaller event. It is only going to last for about 3 to 4 hours, most likely, be completed over the course of an afternoon, and it is the first of many events that we're hoping to kind of build into a stable of these smaller events so that we can make it so that this weekend is that one, and the next weekend is the next, just to keep players coming back to the game. Ninetales Lockdown is slated for release with 3.14. We hope
teasing me with an actual use for the Terrapin, are you?
To run it several times throughout the course of that patch and in future patches as well. We're really excited to see you guys play it. We're excited to see which side you pick, be it Crusader or Ninetales. And coming up next, Jumptown 2, so keep an eye out for that.
Jumptown 2! And we've got some Jumptown 2 here. So we've seen 2 dynamic events now. First was Xenothreat. This is a PvE generally event that includes ship combat, FPS combat, and FPS. Got to get that first person ass. FPS logistics kind of gameplay. It's a cool one. It's good. I think it's the best one that they do still, and we are about to see it run in the live servers again now. But we've also got our second one, Ninetales Lockdown, which was strictly ship combat and had I wouldn't say more narrative, but it was kind of more narratively focused on at least locations we know, which was these space stations that we'd fly to. You'd have to break through a blockade, get into the system, into the station, buy some stuff, and get out. It was a cool idea for an event, but honestly, I feel like, I don't know, the game maybe was too fast for it. Everybody was just flying around at 1,200 meters per second, and it needed some changes, and I think that's what they're doing with Blockade Runner, which we'll look into in a little bit here. But this is Jumptown 2.0. This is a remake of probably one of the best things that's ever happened to Star Citizen, which was just naturally a drug lab was known by players to be a valuable place to get loot, get drugs. And across the community, Discord, Reddit, YouTube, there were guides and tips on how to drug run from this place called Jumptown. There was no reason to. CIG didn't tell us anything about it. It was just something that naturally started to happen. And over time, it developed into huge battles, into meetings of multiple groups of players coming together and trying to basically win this king of the hill, sort of who can control this dispensary and make the most money from getting out alive. It was a really cool, and it was, obviously cool enough to inspire them to make a follow-up event, something that CIG themselves crafted that's a little bit different in the way it runs, but tries to kind of hit that same spirit. I think they missed the spirit of the original Jumptown, but it still ends up being a pretty decent event on its own, especially when it has a lot of people going for it. Unfortunately, sometimes it can be a little bit boring because there's still a lot to figure out about how to make this viable for small amounts of players and large amounts of players. And Astro Historian does have a really nice documentary on this if you guys want to check it out. But anyways, here is Jumptown 2.0, the next dynamic event we're looking at. More of a PvP focused one. Just to show the direction that they were starting to go in.
Purely PvP game, and some people want it to be just a purely PvE game.
And what makes Star Citizen unique is that PvE and PvP are always blended together.
Because it's such an open world game, it adds a new layer of difficulty to your missions.
If your mission is go kill some AI and take some cargo, well, brilliant, that's the mission. But then the element of other players, maybe you arrive there and they're doing the same mission and you decide to help each other out. Maybe you get midway through the mission and you're taking cargo back and people, blow up your ship. And it's that element of not knowing, and it helps keep everything a bit more dynamic.
PvP is really important for us because we can learn from players what kind of strategies they do.
Players will always use weapons in ways that designers didn't intend.
PvP has been an excellent testbed for coming up with new weapons, new ideas for weapons, new gadgets, and so on. Anything for the FPS experience, especially as Star Citizen's AI gets more and more advanced. PvE players will start to see the benefits of, the iterations that we've done through testing in PvP.
It is incredibly important that there are areas where you can more focus on PvE, where there's a bit of a safer space. That might be a system that is more heavily patrolled and policed, like Terra, or
he said Terra.
In contrast to
he said
system that
Terra.
Is completely
give us Terra.
Lawless, like Pyro, with Stanton kind of sitting somewhere in the middle of all of that. A high police presence, the law system kind of keeping players out of PvP can really create those areas where a player can focus on PvE to a much greater degree. For some of the more lucrative opportunities out there, you will probably have to go into a more dangerous area, and those dangerous areas are probably going to entail PvP as part of them. Of course, the elephant in the room with player versus player content is always going to be frame rate and desyncs. But while the engineering teams that are responsible for handling issues around that are fighting the constant battle against those, we are not going to stop developing content to support that style of gameplay.
So one example of that is in the Ninetales scenario. Players can accept the security contract and go to defend a particular objective, But what they don't know is that the enemy Ninetales can also hire players to prevent that. And that uncertainty just makes the scenario and what could happen in it so much more interesting for players.
My first big introduction to PvP in the Persistent Universe was actually Jumptown, the original.
Which was never really designed to be a purely PvP kind of scenario.
We started getting frantic reports that there was this huge bug that a drug outpost was selling things at way too cheap.
It became a bottleneck for players to go to, and because it was a bottleneck, players decided to fight over it.
We ended up sitting there kind of going, we wish we didn't have to pull this
Man,
out.
I love this song. Hold up. Is this Levski? Is that why I never hear this anymore? This is a Levski song, huh? I love this freaking song. I just get like a good like a positive feeling, which is funny because Levski's kind of miserable.
Kind of going, we wish we didn't have to pull this out. Yes, it was wrecking the economy, but it looked super fun. We couldn't action on it immediately, but you better
is it
believe
playing
we all
space?
noted down right then and there that someday we wanted to do Jumptown 2. So development is just starting for Jumptown 2. We're going to be trying to recreate the original experience as much as possible. The first big thing is obviously we can't let it destroy the economy. To handle that, the event will only run for a few hours, but during that time, it will be hyper profitable so that we can hopefully still pull people in for that limited duration. The other big thing is making sure that people know about the event. So
they're just like, they're just showing AC content. This is like an AC video. This isn't even Jumptown. They're just like, put FPS on there.
Thing is making sure that people know about the event. So we're going to be broadcasting things in game, be that comms calls or more likely a mission that will let people know where they can go for this and what it is. There are no plans currently to add capture zones or any huge gamifying elements. If you want to group up and handle it, great. If you want to try and steal the stuff in order to sell in a different location, great. If you want to turn it into some kind of legal organization for reputation with them, great. We are looking to support a very emergent style of play for this event.
Okay. It's more about PvP than the event itself.
So we don't want to favor PvP over PvE or vice versa, purely because people come to the game for different things. And we just allow players to do what they feel like they want to do. We're not going to limit things either way, but we're also going to cater for both sides of the coin.
With Ninetales coming in with that more team-based, kind of factionized PvP, Jumptown coming in after that with more of a on-your-own, make-your-own squad type of PvP, and the upcoming Pyro, which is going to be an absolute lawless hellscape of PvP. There should be a lot of great PvP opportunities coming for people who are interested in that content, and hopefully they'll be interesting and fun and accessible enough that even those of you who normally don't go that way will be tempted into trying it out.
As Star Citizen's gameplay systems and
what a freaking topic PvP is. It's constant. Oh, here we are. We made it to everybody's favorite talk. I got a bone to pick with this one, I'm not gonna lie. Many of you were already here earlier in the day and you heard me talk a little bit about this panel. This is the only CitizenCon panel that I haven't been able to sit through all the way before. Man. But today we're going to go through a few minutes of it, all right? Let's listen to a little bit of talk of dynamic events during this little meeting.
Player team assaults them, and now the much larger threat comes.
All right. Hold on, Tony. Hold on. Let me get you up here.
The players can team up with each other to basically hold them off and then split the goods, et cetera, et cetera.
All right.
So the real point to my mind is it just comes back to is configurability, which is I want to be able to vary the location, vary the the type of material, vary the quantity of that material and the frequency with which it's produced. I want to be able to vary the challenges you'll face trying to basically hold it, and all of a sudden that starts to become representative of what we're trying to do with all these different dynamic events, which is we want to make templates that we can, I always call it object-oriented content creation. It's such a common concept over on the coding side. You don't really see much focus over on the content creation to basically put all of these rules and procedures and processes in place so that you can basically build nice modular chunks of content and easily link them to other pieces so that you're not reinventing the wheel every time you're doing this. Like a good, a good example is the spawn clauses that that we're doing, over for some of the infiltrator missions that we'll be talking about. It's like, that's absolutely going to play a factor in some of these, future iterations of things like, whether it's Ninetales, you could see Ninetales eventually, supporting on the derelicts. Some of those derelicts actually have Ninetales members on them that we can basically create 2 or 20, we can create them over time. We can basically, change, the,
or
what
taking
their
over the
loadouts are.
station. Like, there's so many things you can do with that, so.
Yeah, Pyro is going to be a good test bed for a lot of that stuff, just with the strife that is supposed to be going on out there.
So,
not to give too
looking
much
forward
away.
to it.
All right, dynamic events. What's up?
All right, let's bring Luke into the conversation now. We started working on the Xenothreat event around March of 2020, and it took about a year to get it out the door. We knew that it was going to be extremely
This is October of 2021, by the way.
difficult because we were missing so much of what we needed, including everything from the dynamic mission service that would drive the back-end logic to the capital ship AI, target prioritization for turrets, functional countermeasures, tons of dialogue, and countless other things. Part of the allure, though, was that in one shot, we'd have a great test case for a litany of important features, like battles far larger than anything we'd previously done, and a test bed for creating missions that supported a variety of different play styles, like ship-to-ship combat and salvaging. So, Luke, from your perspective, what were some of the big lessons we learned from Xenothreat?
Did he just say salvaging?
Xenothreat was our first attempt at a large-scale fleet battle, so we learned a lot. The biggest takeaway was that we needed to develop our overly simplistic friendly fire system, which was leading to players receiving unfair crime stats and being kicked from the mission.
Hey, Hawk's in the chat,
So in the
dude.
recent
Good to see you.
event, we made major
Replied on DM. I'll check it out. Thank you.
detection and tolerances, which drastically cut down on unfair crime stats, according to the feedback and analytics we received. What's great is this kind of change improves the whole game, not just the event, and paves the way for more large-scale space battles in the future. I think it's also important to
Man, I love the shield effects. Y'all remember when every shield in this game was just a bubble? And every time your shield was hit in one place, the whole bubble would flare up? These shields look so much better. They know they've been in the game since here, but I still enjoy the effects. You don't get to notice them as much until you see it on a capital ship, and then you're like, oh, wait, that's pretty nice.
Space battles in the future. I think it's also important
Or maybe you're not. Maybe that's just me.
Became clear was that players wanted a counter mission involving PvP. So we've started planning with this in mind for subsequent releases.
Luke, as the performance gradually improves over the next few quarters, what sort of things would you most like to change about Xenothreat?
I think most people would expect my answer to be throw more AI at the player. But it might be that when performance improves, our AI becomes much deadlier, which could actually lead to us reducing their numbers. This balancing is always the most difficult part of mission creation. The AI's performance can be wildly different on our local servers versus what it might be like on an overtaxed
Oh, we
live
know.
server. And if a mission is too easy, it's not just a case of throwing more AI at it. This will only compound.
Look, now I can say it's the old Moby Glass. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That makes me happy. 323 win.
Performance issues. We were happy with the balancing we achieved, but it wasn't quite what we hoped for. Once performance is improved, we hope to rebalance and deliver the experience we intended.
Luke, we've invested a lot of engineering effort into our spawn closet tech, which allows us to precisely and intelligently push NPCs into and out of an area. The first major test of this tech will be the infiltrator class of missions, which I wanted to provide much more varied and
Is this dude reading a teleprompter?
than anything we've previously seen. To that end, we can now determine at runtime the type and number of NPCs we want to insert at a location, often at the behest of Quantum. We can also apply a litany of rules to the spawning, like how many can be active at once, how the spawn rate changes when an alarm has gone off, and whether a boss might be found wandering the area with his guards or only after they've all been dispatched. The mission template supports a wide variety of objectives ranging.
It's so. It's like this is the Tony we're listening to.
Attributes and the spatial positioning of resources have allowed us to improve the accuracy of its output.
We know what your teleprompter cadence sounds like, Tony.
From killing everyone at that location to only killing select individuals, to protecting NPCs from any harm, to hacking computers, to extracting designated materials. Can you go over some of these mission variations in more detail?
Of course, Tony. The underground facilities were the locations we chose for our first implementation of spawn closets. So this is where players will find new missions, as well as some existing missions that have been vastly improved by the addition of spawn closets and non-combatants. One of the new missions sends players to kill a heavily armoured target who only shows himself once his crew have been wiped out. Another involves the player searching a friendly facility for a number of boxes identified.
Okay, this isn't even, they're not even talking too much about dynamic events here. I'm trying to find quantum updates. I thought they would talk more about the new dynamic event. Hold on.
Yes. Thanks to spawn closets, we can now spawn reinforcement waves and spring ambushes anytime we want, with players able to recognise where AI is likely to reinforce from. Not only does this allow us to build brand new mission types, it allows us to spawn manageable amounts of AI and only reinforce when some of those are dead, to better balance the difficulty of the encounter.
What do you mean? This is a completely natural conversation. Everything's live.
And the Eliminate Boss mission is a great example of that, because we've essentially taken the Eliminate All and Eliminate Specific objectives and combined them to create a new experience where players must draw their target out of hiding by first killing all of his crew.
Luke, another mission template we're currently working on is called Rescue Transport, and it revolves around getting NPCs to a specified location.
Oh!
One of the
What? Oh my gosh, do you guys remember that? I can't believe we just stumbled on this. I didn't know this existed in this video. Oh, love coming across little nuggets like that. Wow, hold on. Let me see if I have the only footage of this saved that I know of. I think they showed it at CitizenCon 2022. Is that this year? No, this is a year after. When they were working on getting NPCs to basically follow you out to a ship, get on board the ship, take a seat, and let you fly them to a place and then get a reward for completing that mission. That's what they're talking about here. I had no idea they mentioned it in this panel.
Variations allows the NPC to request personal transport via a service beacon, just like a player, to a designated location. Other variations involve adding assorted complications to getting the NPCs on board your ship, like having to first outsmart or outfight their captors, unlocking their prison door to release them, safely escorting them back to your ship for transport to the desired drop site. Longer term, we're going to add support in this mission template for a lot of other combinations, like having to drag unconscious characters onto your ship and back to a hospital and trying to lead NPCs through a burning ship.
Where is it?
Luke, where do we stand with the current implementation of this, and what remains to be done before we can push it out the door?
Come on now,
Well,
there
Tony,
he is,
we're at
guys.
the point where we have a working prototype in which AI can be asked to follow.
Okay, this is the same video we just watched. I guess I could have just waited.
Wait and take a seat aboard your ship. And even with this rudimentary setup, we've been able to flesh out the mission flow to a very detailed degree, and have made a lot of headway into planning the dialogue requirements. We've gone some effort to make sure that the mission is more than a delivery mission where the box has legs, so the client has patience that can wear thin, with your tip and rating being calculated based on your performance. We'll also be developing AI behaviours to deal with what happens should the player decide to kidnap them. The rescue mission module has been designed in such a way that it can work in conjunction with others like Infiltrator.
NPC kidnapping,
meaning that we
huh?
can easily inject some obstacles in your way, like a base full of captors. These missions will drive the development of AI following, so once complete, we'll be able to leverage that throughout the rest of the game.
It's another one of those things where they kind of got to a point where they're like, hey guys, there's no reason to do this before server meshing, so they put it aside. Which we're getting closer and closer to as well when it comes to quantum. You'll hear more about that. All right, give me a second. Never mind, just finished. All right, here is the next dynamic event that we saw at this point. This is 317.2 coming in the summer of 2023. This was another event that we got. This was, I think, the third Xenothreat, Ninetales Lockdown, Jumptown. It's the fourth. This is the fourth one that we got. And this was primarily an FPS PvE event. However, like we are wont to do, players found out to make it more PvP focused. And unfortunately, without the reputation hostility, that was harder to do in a natural way. All of these events, I'm hoping, change completely after 323 with the reputation hostility, allowing players to fight with these gangs. It's going to be a freaking crazy time, but I do think letting players do that is going to encourage other players to jump in more, because those players are going to be like, hey, there's actually players that we can go kill. That's more exciting than an AI. So maybe that'll be good for the events. Maybe it'll be total chaos. We'll have to see.
For this event, we have a IFI, which is the Identifier Friend or Foe Inverter. And basically what that does is that's going to turn the platform's turrets onto the side of the Ninetales. It also affects the restricted area, so you won't be able to fly your ship in.
These new platforms are huge, and we have done the best we can to sign these and put maps up all over the place that show you, like, you are here.
You'll find signage all around that shows you where shuttles are to get between the islands. However,
they are slightly different to how shuttles currently work. They're more like elevators in that you have to call them to your location, and when you get in, you have to send them to the next location. So be aware of that.
You can't get to all the islands via the shuttles, but we've put enough toys around to allow you to get there a different way.
Elliot!
So there are various locked containers.
Always good to see Elliot on an ISC.
You'll need a code to get into them.
Make sure to check them all because they have a multitude of surprises. We've added a maze in this somewhere. Just remember that you can't jump as far when you're wearing heavy armor. This event might take a while, so don't forget to loot your fallen enemies.
We decided we weren't going to hold the player's hand in this mission. There are a lot of optional secret objectives that players will have to figure out for themselves.
Man, if the frame rate in the game just ran better, this would actually be a really fun event. We've made it to the end, my friends, where they talk about the most recent dynamic, or now they're going to call it global events that we've found. Oh, Tony Z, I got you. They've talked to us about the most recent dynamic or global events we've seen called Blockade Runner. We still don't have it, but I want to draw attention again to how they're kind of referring to things differently at this point. And then we'll talk about all of it overall. Listen in.
And in addition to the standard missions that populate the verse, the mission feature team is always examining and reevaluating the global events that run throughout the year. Do they perform the way we intend they should? Not just in frame rate, but also in engagement, enjoyment, enchantment, entertainment. And if they're not, perhaps they need enhancement or extinguishment. And the new global event Blockade Runner hopes to be just a little bit of both.
Blockade Runner actually replaces Ninetales Lockdown. We analyzed Ninetales Lockdown and we looked at participation in that global event. And we also looked at what players did in it. So participation in Ninetales Lockdown wasn't actually that high. We realized, like, there's no point maintaining this global event.
Unfortunately, it was not. It just didn't, like, the one time I played it, it was just not very fun. I think you have to be in specific places for it to really feel good. And since there's not much voice acting, there's not much narration or narrative at all that drives you through these events. If there's nothing happening right in front of you, it's hard to know if there's anything happening at all. And I think that's something that Star Citizen suffers from a lot in general.
Plays it, you know? We looked back at the other ones that we had made, like Xenofret, and looked at the gameplay in those that players do engage with and they enjoy. And that was the aspect of going on those wrecks in Xenofret, picking up the crates and delivering them. They enjoy this experience, they enjoy working together as a team to do it. So we thought, what can we do with that and make a new event? Something that players will instantly understand what the event's about. We came up with this idea of Blockade Runner.
Blockade Runner is a new global event that we've been working on. In this event, there's a criminal faction that sets a blockade around some of the space stations in the universe. This makes trade and travel between these stations problematic, and their goal in doing this is to prevent the trade of one specific material that is important for the refinement of spaceship fuel.
The idea is that a player will be called to help deliver a new commodity that is involved in the production of quantum fuel and deliver it from our LEO stations, like Everest Harbour, to its refinery sister stations. And we have to deliver a certain amount of this within a certain narrow amount of time.
This material has a short half-life, so if it's not stored properly at a specific facility, then it will expire and become worthless, and you'll have to try again.
When you arrive at the LEO, there'll be like a blockade from criminals, and you will have to get through that blockade, land, buy this commodity as much as you can fit on your ship, then you'll have to take off, and then you'll have to brave the blockade again, and then QT to one of the refineries. On the way, you may be interdicted by more of these criminals who don't want you to get away.
Target destroyed.
And then on the other side, no blockade, but you'll have to get through that. Then you will land, and then you will sell. So there's this delivery loop for players. Not every ship will be best suited for dealing with these guys without, some escorts. So the idea is that players will also take this mission and support those other players in combat ships.
Maybe you delegate one person with the big tanker.
I think something that I'm going to appreciate about master modes is it will make this kind of thing more easy. Flying escort for a big ship when the speeds, and I know it's not great. Trust me, I'm not a big fan of artificial limitations, but when speeds are limited to a certain amount, it does make it easier to keep pace with the ship, fly closer, and be a little bit more visually strategic, which, like, I know space is big and you're supposed to be really far away from stuff, but it's nice to be able to see. I'm a very visual person. I'm guessing some of you are too. These spaceships look pretty nice. Maybe I could see them a little more. Yeah, I like that this event seems to be made in a way that it's supposed to be applied to just any gang, giving the idea that this might be a global event right now, but this totally could be just like the Korea event, and this could run at any space station as long as, like the scenario we said earlier, somebody does something to block ships from delivering to that space station. Eventually the space station puts out a beacon to ask for help, which I think is exactly what they do in this mission.
Ship and others to fend off any enemies along the way. At its core, Blockade Runner is a combination of the cargo transport and selling and space combat. One of the things I like most about Star Citizen is the space combat. I've never really been much of an FPS player, but I do like space combat, and one of the big elements of Blockade Runner is space combat. The stakes are higher, so if you screw up, you don't just simply regenerate. You regenerate and have to buy all your cargo again, so watch out for that. As the dev, I've been playing this entirely by myself up till now. We're going to be going through some playtests soon, so we'll be able to experience the mission properly, but thus far I've been playing it solo with a ship that can both fight and transport.
What ship are you?
The Cutlass Black. It's the best ship for everything.
That's a nice touch. Reminds me of home. So that's all of our dynamic events, or global events, as they seem to be calling them. And if you go to any of these static monthly reports, let's say from, I don't know, October of last year. I don't know how much stuff they really put in the October report because it's pre-CitizenCon. So they're calling it, yeah, see, they call Blockade Runner global event here. They're calling Siege of Orison a global event here. But then if you were to go, say, a month or so earlier, yeah, see here? 1 year prior to that, they're calling Xenothreat a dynamic event. So in between 2022 and 2023, something happened where they started to change the nomenclature. I'm not saying it's a big deal. I know I've focused on it a lot, but I think it's interesting. I think it speaks a little bit towards their design ideas of how these events work. Either way, that's a deep dive into dynamic events, what they've said about them, what we have learned about them ourselves. They're supposed to be events that can repeat over and over again. They're also supposed to be events that can launch one shot and last for weeks, or maybe just for a little while. They're events that are spawned by certain conditions or are triggered by CIG themselves. And it sounds like they are, in the global sense, something that runs at the same time on every shard across the globe, and in the dynamic event sense, something that is triggered for that specific shard and runs dynamically. And that's why they seem to be calling all of these things that we're currently seeing global events, because Invictus Week, IAE, Blockade Runner, Xenothreat, Overdrive Initiative, all of these are basically running on a schedule and are always meant to run for everybody at the same time. Can't wait to see dynamic events. I hope that was informative in some ways. I hope you got to learn something from that, because I think they've got a lot of big plans for the system in the future. I think this is going to be one of the main things that we're doing. We've talked about raids being end game, base building obviously is end game. I think dynamic events are going to be one of those things, as long as they don't get too stale, as long as CIG can continue to implement them in different kind of unique ways and not just combat focused things. I think these will be at least these will be really good for new players. Probably as you age a little more in the verse and you're kind of more and more used to the game, you'll stick to more sandbox gameplay or gameplay stuff like that. But these global events could be really, really good for players coming in.